record it to the cloud so everyone can have access to it if they want. Okay, so the presentation is by Richard Thieme, and it is a book that he has written, Mobius, a memoir, and that is a fiction. And not so, well, if you believe what Richard is saying, it's fictional. As you read the book, you may find, wow, he sure knows an awful lot about some of this stuff. But again, it is a fictional book. And with that, I will turn it over to Richard and let's get into this thing. I found it very, very interesting.
Well, why don't you tell me where you want to start, or I can address your question. What is the meaning of Mobius, a memoir?
Did you know that was my first question?
Mobius is derived from the geometrical form, a Mobius strip. If you look at the cover, I don't know if it would show up, but the cover right down here, there is, I don't think it shows up very well, but there's a Mobius strip. It looks like a figure 8, but it's not because there's only one edge. It looks like a 2-edged structure, but there's only one edge. And it's an interesting geometrical form in that if you set off on a trip down a Mobius strip, you come back to yourself. And that is the predominant metaphor of the book also, that Mobius is recruited into an intelligence agency and begins a life as an intelligence professional. And he does that, I don't name dates, but you can infer that he was recruited in college and he's in his 50s, as is his former lover and longtime friend, Penny. So he's been doing it for many years, and you can get a good idea from his attitude that he loved doing it because he was included in an elite cadre of people who were given special permissions to do things differently in the world than most people ordinarily get to do. And I make the statement about the book that it symbolizes our larger life as well in the national security state since World War II, in that the secrecy and classification system we developed appropriately during World War II didn't end. It immediately ported to the Cold War after the war. And even when the Cold War ended in '89, we invented another war called the War on Drugs, which is as silly as a war on terrorism, because you can't wage a war against a non-entity, and terrorism is a quality of behavior. It's not an entity. And drugs, of course. And it, as he says, Mobius knows that drugs have been mixed up with the intelligence community for a long time. And so one of the chapters in the book deals with someone who wanted to expose that. And he found out it was much harder to do than he thought. Anyway, that's why it's a Mobius. It's a code name that he uses instead of his real name, Nick Cirque. But of course, that's not his real name either, because when you go into this work, you discover that you have multiple levels of deception to implement in a lifelong pursuit. And it is a memoir. A number of people thought it was my memoir and thought I was writing my story. So that's why I was at pains to say to David, no, this is a memoir written by Mobius, written by Nick, by an intelligence professional. He is not me. And that silver-haired beauty with the scarf in the second column there, third from the left, her name is Shirley, and it's not Penny. Not Penny.
Yeah, now, that's what you want us all to believe.
I actually do know a woman who has achieved some terrific things in intelligence work. and security, whose name is Penny. And the ironic thing about that is her name for the 27 years I have known her has been Penny Lane, which you might recognize as coming from a Beatles song. The truth is that's not her name. Now you can find out her name if you want to do the detective work, but it's ironic that the one Penny I know is not a real name of a person either. But it's not her either. I like her, I'm fond of her, and I immensely respect the work she has done. And we have connected, I will say, like so many of the people I've connected with in my professional life, all over the world, because I do speak in conferences all over the world, and they often involve intelligence and security professionals. And in 27 years, you get to know the lay of the land. It's that simple. So no, it is not my story, but obviously it is the least untruthful narrative I could tell, as Mobius keeps saying. And he's quoting James Clapper, who said that to Congress, former CIA. He said, I told them the least untruthful thing I could. Now, a normal human being thinks that sounds like he lied to them, but the rules are different inside the intelligence community. It's not a lie. It's a cover story that you must maintain. And the danger you can run into, which plagues Mobius after many years, is not atypical. People have told me they have been so many different people in the course of doing the work that they don't know who they are anymore. And the point of the Mobius strip is to come home to your core self, if you still have one. And the lesson there, of course, somebody said.
What is your real name?
Pardon me?
What is your real name?
My name is Richard Thieme. And this is where we say, will the real Richard thing stand up? And I would stand up, headphones would pull.
And just so everyone knows, Richard is also on the board. He is in charge of programs, and he has been helping us develop programs last year that were canceled and this year now going forward.
Yes, the one that was scheduled for the Bell Museum was a talk I have given more than 50 times based on a book to which I contributed with scholars called UFOs in Government, a Historical Inquiry. And suddenly 60 Minutes has dignified what we have been doing and saying for literally half a century in our research work. The book is in lots of libraries, over 100 university libraries. So it's a serious work examining how the governments, different aspects of government, responded to UFO phenomena since 1947. And we document everything. There's not a speculative word in it. Almost 1,000 footnotes. So that's the book on which I will be speaking at the Bell. But now people are discussing UFOs suddenly the way we in the field have been discussing them for many years. And that's relevant to Mobius only in that the work I have done in that field also has given me deep, profound insights into the nature of misinformation and disinformation and cover stories. A good friend at NSA, and I will say I have worked very, very closely with people at NSA and at CIA and at DIA and in corporate and military settings, because I've been doing these speeches and this consulting and this writing for 27 years. And I've keynoted security conferences, major ones, in 15 different countries. So you do get to know people pretty well, as Larry David would say, pretty well. And I believe that the ultimate moral truth of this narrative is what I'm trying to depict, the complexity of the work with which, in fact, I also must admit I have been complicit in the close relationships and working relationships I've had with people who can honestly step up and say, I am an intelligence professional. I will go on the record easily and truthfully by saying I have never been a full-time employee of any intelligence agency. And Mobius intentionally mashes up the different agencies, kind of like Forrest Gump showed up at everywhere. And that's intentional. It's a blend of different settings and different cultures because they each have their own culture. And you probably know we have currently well-known 17 different major intelligence agencies operating right now, 17 different ones, not just CIA or NSA, but 17 different ones. And there are others. That's not counting, well, what an FBI man said to me some time ago. He said, you're going to have either one big brother or a lot of little brothers. So choose carefully. And when I saw him years later, he said, well, I was wrong. We have both. We have government, but we have Google, and we have Ernst & Young, and we have Blackwater, and we have all sorts of corporate entities with extraordinary resources and power who exercise that power in a surveillance society, and one which rewards the talent and the procedural work of the intelligence community, even though they're not intelligence professionals. It's just the water we swim in now, and Mobius tries to make that clear. He justifies what he does until the point is reached where he can no longer justify it anymore. And I don't know how much you want to give away about the course of the book, or for those who haven't read it yet, I would say yet, how Penny serves as a kind of counterweight to Mobius as their lives interleave, really, for a long period of time. And she goes through her own moral trajectory as a social worker, doing intensive counseling one-on-one with people who tax her in some of the same ways that Mobius is taxed as well. So that's kind of an intro. I've gone on enough.
Penny seems like a very stabilizing force for Nick.
She is. She's a holdfast. He keeps coming back to her. And part of that is part of the reason for that is because she never really investigates as he would who he is. She doesn't check out when he tells her why he's gone. She doesn't check out what kind of work he says he does. He was studying English literature when they met, and he tells her that he gets low-level jobs as an instructor, and that's why he has to keep moving around, but he always finds a way to come home. But it's always Nick, it's always Mobius who says when he's coming back. She never goes to him. She stays settled where she is and relies on her job with its intensive interaction with the distressed to give her the rush that she needs, that he gets from his work. So yeah, she is stabilizing, but part of that is because of who he imagines her to be. So ironically, he is valuable for her because of who she imagines him to be. So they are both engaged in self-deception in order to sustain the continuity of their relationship. Because if they both knew and told the complete truth, the relationship would never have lasted for so many years. Now, go ahead, questions.
Yeah, early in the book, you mention a term called humplings.
Yes.
Would you tell us about that?
Sure. I don't know if it's an unmitigated proud moment that I have contributed a word to the English language, which is used in some quarters, and it is humplings. A collection of short stories, which a publisher brought forth, called Mind Games, includes Zero Day Roswell, and one called Break Memory. And in both stories, I believe the word humpling figures, and there's an explanation for what a humpling is. Humpling, according to a person in the intelligence community, is a person in the hump of the bell curve that it's made up of people in society. Now, if you think of an inchworm shaped like that, with a little snout and a little tail, but a huge hump, then you've got the image of human society. The front is what they call the masters. These are people who deviously do exercise power and influence in our society. You don't have to believe in the Illuminati or anything outrageous to know that elites in small numbers exercise undue power and influence in our society. And those are the masters.
Kappas, Richard?
Pardon me?
Are those the Phi Beta Kappas? Are we at their tail end?
Not often. Not often. Academic success does not always equal power and influence. It might equal a good life and an interesting person and success in various ways, but not of the sort that I'm talking about. The sort I'm talking about, a friend went to Davos, the international conference, and she said what struck her when she was talking to these mega wealthy people is that not one of them had a sense of allegiance to a country. They were beyond that. Their structures, which they built out of offshore accounts and their own kind of laws and regulations for governing life in that structure that they built, really gives them kind of a super level of life compared to the rest of us. We think we belong to a nation, they don't. And that's just, again, the way the world has been built. Because take Microsoft or Apple, far more of their business is outside of America than in. Many banks, Bank of America, Citibank. Citibank has 70,000 branches all over the world. I don't know how many countries. The simple fact is it's not a Bank of America. It's a bank, a world bank. And it has to be grounded somewhere legally, but often it supersedes the constriction of the laws in the country where it is grounded as well. Now, so the world really consists of influence and power exercised in ways which the normal person does not know, even though they feel its impact and its effect. Well, these are the humplings. This is the 80% in the hump who the masters regulate and manage successfully through a wide variety of means. And then the 10% at the end, they call the dregs. The masters keep the dregs, so the humplings will be glad they are not dregs. And they will be grateful for the masters continuing to manage society in a way which keeps them, well, we used to say fat and happy, keeps them in the hump. And as this entire organism moves forward into the future, the masters always get there first, the humplings follow. And I have been asked, who is a humpling? Well, some people are humplings all the time, but everybody is a humpling some of the time, because none of us really, I don't think, maybe the people whose names are up on the screen, but not their pictures or their images, maybe those are masters and they're not showing their faces because they don't want us to know that they're chuckling as I describe us humplings, which they know they are not. But a good master pretends to be a humpling, because if you're pretending to be a humpling, the other humplings aren't angry with you. But if you're obviously managing.
Richard, I'm happy to be a humpling.
Humplings are. I'm glad to have that recorded, because that is a beautiful snippet, a clip from this recording that will go far and wide viral as an illustration of a happy humpling, declaring his happiness and his humplinghood all at the same time.
Well, you can see behind me, I'm a fisherman, so I'm general fishing season's open. I'm just generally happy now.
Got what you need, right, right. And what do you care if Bill Gates had 412 affairs?
Right.
Not a problem, not a
I
problem.
fearless.
What do we care if he had different rules because he was so powerful?
You
Well,
know, it does bother me that he records everything you do on email, and Google records everything you do, and they share all of that information. Apple too, share it with the government.
well,
That
they don't just share it with the government, they share it with each other, and they share it with the brokers who use it to great economic effect. We've all gotten emails within 8 seconds of mentioning something, right? In an email, and an ad pops up immediately because it's monitored in real time. They say, "Oh, are you interested in the lawnmower? I heard you, you know." It's a combinatory structure that we have built. But that's getting a little bit away from the book, other than to say, this is the water in which Mobius swims, and he is given power to effectively alter what people believe as part of his work. And when I say it extends to the national security state since World War II, the problem is with the flow of information moving so quickly in all directions and breaking down borders or boundaries around individuals or countries or any entity for which those borders and boundaries served as a defining structure. Ever since that has happened, the national security state has really become a place where blowback happens all the time. Now, blowback is when you do an operation and it has unforeseen, unexpected consequences that blow back on the perpetrator of the operation. Well, when information is moving, as I say, at the speed and immediacy with which it moves in today's world, it is impossible to direct a message or a meme or a meaningful statement at an enemy without simultaneously directing it to people you allegedly serve. And that's considered collateral damage, that in order to deceive the enemy, you deceive the people of the country you are allegedly protecting. And that's of necessity. That's been true for some time, but in the wired world, in the digital world, it's true at a higher level. It's true at a meta level. Any other questions?
Yeah, so Richard, can I ask you a humbling question?
Sure.
If this connection, this kind of knowledge across boundaries that we're talking about, particularly on an electronic means, is so fluid, why is it so hard to prove things like interference in elections or conspiracy in January 6th or other kinds of things that we seem to have some doubts about?
Well, when you say what hard to prove, tell me what you think is hard to prove. Do you think it has been hard to prove that the insurrection was?
No, I think you're right. That wasn't the way to put it. I should have said, how can there not be absolutely indisputable evidence that's available to all of us?
This is why. It's are you familiar with the old folk tale of the gnome who knew where the gold was buried? A woodsman went into the woods and he captured the gnome who knew where the gold was buried. It was under one tree in the forest of many trees. And he said, "I'm going to hit you in the head with a shovel if you don't show me the tree." And the gnome took him and he said, "Okay, this is the tree." And the woodsman took off his yellow scarf and he tied it around the tree. And he knew that gnomes cannot lie. It's not in their nature. So he made the gnome promise him that he would not untie the scarf from the tree while he went and got a bigger shovel to dig up the gold. And the gnome swore, "I will not untie the scarf." And the woodsman went and he came back and the gnome had kept his word. He had left that scarf where it was, but he had tied an identical scarf around every tree in the forest. Okay, so it's not that he didn't know where the gold was. It's that the immediacy of a response to confuse with misinformation and misdirect, as someone at NSA said, who taught cover and deception, he said there are three legs to the stool of deception: illusion, misdirection, or sleight of hand, and ridicule. He said, but the greatest of these is ridicule. So I know there are top lawyers who have seminars at their summer home in Montana for weeks, teaching nothing but how to use ridicule effectively, when to use it, and how to completely undermine the reputation of a person in a trial so that nothing they say subsequently will be believed by a jury. Distraction means using the media, and now we should know a lot about how that's done. Don't look over here, look over here. If we don't want you to look at something here, we will create an incident. We will create an event. We'll create, these days, a sensational item. And people will rush from side to side of the boat, and the boat will list, the ship of state will tilt back and forth. But it is easy to distract people. I was mentioning to Shirley that I walked around one of the lakes nearby just yesterday, and there are benches and people on the benches, and not one was sitting there looking at the egret and the great blue heron and the water on a beautiful day. They were all looking at their phone like this. Every single one probably had a stiff neck because everyone had a 45-degree angle towards the phone. I have grandchildren. They're hooked. They are hooked, as surely as if they were given crack cocaine with their cereal when they were 5 years old. So once we are hooked into a medium that is easy to use to create illusions, which, forgive me if this offends anyone politically, but if the Republican Party is not being bound and sold to that methodology right now, I'm not saying the Democrats are wonderful, I'm saying what we're witnessing now with a lot of grown people who know better, just united out of terror that they will lose their jobs and their money and their power, and saying the most outrageous lies collectively. Now, as you say, everybody knows their lies. There was a statement yesterday by the Board of Election Commissioners in Arizona, both Republicans and Democrats, begging them to stop this farce of theoretically overseeing the ballots, which have already been counted and recounted in the most disreputable, disgusting way. How can people believe that? Well, as long as you have people willing to believe that and to be included immediately in a structure based on explaining to you why things are the way they are. And that's what a conspiracy theory is. It's connecting far too few dots far too quickly in order to have the illusion of understanding, so that the world, which threatens you with chaos every morning when you wake up, is more manageable, because now you know why it's happening, or at least you think you do. So in fact, the very means of communication, which ought to simultaneously make it possible to nail down what's really happening, also make available the tools of disinformation just as quickly. And as you know, you work in technology, all technologies are dual use. Microwaves may cook your breakfast, but when they're directed at someone in an embassy, they may also scramble their brains so much that they become dysfunctional. All technologies are dual use. All medical technologies, pandemics, for example, and now we're doing biological engineering of organisms at a level that even high schoolers can do. So what's coming is going to probably be a lot worse than COVID. A friend at CIA who is a lead technologist, he said that's what keeps him up at night. knowing that we can't screen for or stop bio if it's effectively used by nameless actors who may perceive that they have less to lose. And then that gives rise to theories like the fact that the Chinese allowed that out from Wuhan and then did nothing and shut down every avenue for telling the truth for a long, long time still, in order to see how it played. You know, because it's a very dangerous world, right? And so you go back to Mao Zedong, who said about nuclear war, he said, we could take it. We could take 1 million dead and be fine. You couldn't. And so he was weighing the cost versus the benefit of nuclear war. And it's, of course, going to be an equation someone will consider when they consider whether to release a bug that could create a pandemic. What is the blowback? How many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands will we lose? But will we profit in the long run by the erosion to the political and economic? I mean, this pandemic has been a test case for what does it do to a country or an economy like Europe's and ours to have this happen. Well, we've got the data. So that's why Mobius, you know, this is a complex book with a lot of gray areas. And he says, this is why we do this work. He uses the metaphor several times. We're on the edges of an empire, stepping through bloodied guts as we fight like War of the Roses or Game of Thrones, as we fight hand to hand to do combat on your behalf so you can sleep at night and wake up in a world sufficiently similar to the one in which you went to sleep. And he says, that's what you people want. You want to know you're going to wake up in a world that was like the one in which you went to sleep. You don't want chaos. And I did write a paper once upon a time for one of the agencies, articulating the notion that in the trenches, de facto, the intelligence agencies globally serve that purpose to forestall the eruption of chaos, which is always threatening to break out. So if you want an articulate description of that situation, watch Men in Black, where he says there's always an Archelian battle cruiser hanging around the earth. And the reason you people can get on with your happy little lives is because you don't know it. Well, that's what Mobius in effect says too. We fight the bloody battles in order to protect you. So he says, don't get uppity and moral on me, because if we weren't doing that for you, you would all be toast, because there's a lot of evil in the world. So the tension between that and what he subsequently finds himself doing is one of the primary tensions of the book. How do you somehow hold on to your humanity and your own soul when ultimately conditions compel you to go beyond the limits you thought you would never get past? And that part of the book where torture becomes germane to what he's doing. Before it was known in the newspapers, on the nightly news, what we were doing after 9/11, I was, by nature of my work, talking to people who were tortured, and I was talking to people who tortured them. And a therapist I was seeing, ironically, to try to enlist that medical college to confront the CIA with the medical ethical dilemma of what they were doing, which nobody wanted to touch. I went to the AMA, that's in the book. That conversation in the book with the bioethicist at the AMA, that is as autobiographical as it can get, trying to say, don't you think you ought to be alert to the ethical issues of what we're doing? Nobody wanted to touch it. But the therapist said to me, Richard, you're showing symptoms of secondary trauma by virtue of engaging with these people who are communicating clearly what they are doing and what was done to them. What were they doing? Oops, death. I had never heard that term before. That was an oops death. You're torturing someone and oops, they're dead. And you call in a doctor to falsify a death certificate and say that they died of natural causes. And that's just the start of what we were doing. Well, Mobius finds himself in the thick of that and has to ask the soul-searing questions that I would like to think any one of us would ask when the reality of the humanity of the people with whom he is engaged comes to the fore. And these are not easy questions. I talked to a woman in Israel who worked with the young people being inducted into the army. Everybody is. They all served 2 years in the army. And the dehumanizing nature of having to patrol just the gates where Palestinians or Arabs are coming and going to work in Israel. And this is the dilemma. She couldn't stand what they had become in order to stay in that job for the army. But on the other hand, there was someone who had a slightly softer heart, and a woman who said she was pregnant and please don't pat me down, it's blah, blah, blah. And they didn't pat her down and she blew herself up and killed Israeli soldiers. So on the one hand, if you treat people like animals, you become an animal. And on the other hand, if you don't, you die. So when you are on the front lines, and in Israel, I always feel and know I'm on the front lines, you live differently. You have a guard in front of every establishment. You don't sit, you go in and you sit toward the back with your back on the wall so you can watch the door. And you case out how you're going to get out of there. If someone comes through that door heavily with a lot of clothes on or whatever, any anomalous signal, you are vigilant, hyper vigilant all the time. And we're not quite like that. 4 years ago, when we moved to Minneapolis, we were not like that at all. We're getting more and more like that. The more Minneapolis becomes whatever it is that it's on a trajectory to become. It's confrontational with, well, how do you hold on to your humanity and not dehumanize the other, whoever the other is? Well, Mobius is taught that he is part of an elite, and you get to break the rules. You get to pass go, and you collect $200 every time, and you never go to jail. And you get to break the laws of every country in the world, except this one. And then after 9/11, that changed. And I have a scene in the director's office of an agency that is true to life, where the directive came from the Bush White House, Executive Order 12333, and it changed the law. And people who were veterans in the intelligence community said they couldn't believe what they were hearing, because we can't do that. That's against the law. And they said, that's what we are told to do. And as the director says in the book, when we get an order, we salute. And so when you do things that broke the current former laws, you rewrite the laws or your understanding of them and count on the courts to rewrite interpretations of the behaviors, and you go through the looking glass, and we did. So that things that before 9/11 were not thinkable in terms of intrusion and surveillance became the norm. And as I said, they're carried out, as you mentioned, by a lot of little brothers, not just one big brother. So the moral choices that confront anyone who chooses to become conscious are not simple. They're not trivial. Not if you think that your actions and your if you believe your integrity means anything at all. And that ultimately is the confrontation which you will have with yourself if you're paying attention while you're reading this novel, which is the least untruthful thing I could say about what I have learned over the past, 27 years working in security and intelligence, and 20 years before that as an Anglican priest, because those stories become pennies. What Penny deals with as a counselor is what I dealt with as a clergyman. So obviously this book for me was a way to integrate 30, 40, 50 years of my life and the moral dilemmas and the subtleties and complexities which confronted me. And how do you resolve those? How do you find a way to remember who you were, which is what Mobius is ultimately trying to do.
Richard,
Yes,
can I
Sarah.
make a comment? Because I've been thinking about what you were saying about the relationship between Penny and who? And
Nick.
Nick, right. So, consistent kind of with what you're saying, and this is just kind of a thought about, I mean, you wrote the book, so obviously you know what their relationship is, but this idea that they don't ask each other about the truth speaks to the idea that the very experiences that you're talking about, or even actually being a therapist and working with people, that it's not always about what the truth is, because sometimes that will never get you anywhere in helping someone achieve whatever it is they came to you seeking, because truth is sometimes only relative
Sure.
in the scheme of those things. And so in their relationship, at first I was thinking, well, maybe their relationship is just kind of a fraud or a fallacy, but I think it's a mirror for many of the ways relationships are today, because many people don't know what the truth is about someone else. And if you spent all your time trying to find out, there is so much deception that you would cease living and interacting and only spend all of your time, as we find that a lot of people do, trying to figure out what someone else is up to. I mean, that's kind of what gossip is all about. Gossip is basically other people talking about things that they really don't know anything about, but they're trying to figure it out. So, I think their relationship is very parallel just to the story that you're describing.
I think you're absolutely right. Everything you said is correct. And that's another theme or thread of the book, which is that people will think, as some have said to me, someone wrote to me, the book is very well done. He said, "Thank God I don't live in that world." And I thought that's wonderful, because you do.
Yes.
Because I know you. I know you, and I know your world, and you do, and you don't even know that.
Well, yes, the idea that people think they know the truth, but actually they're only believing in deceit. You know what I'm saying? And so,
well, but it is, I think it is a matter of degree. Wouldn't you agree with that? That Penny says that when she started counseling, she wanted to. We all begin counseling professions with a grandiosity of being the healer, and she wanted to move people from 1 to 100. And she said, in middle age, she says, if I can get somebody from 32 to 33, I'm happy, because the game has changed to, can I help someone move in a better direction than they were going, and have some of the skills to kind of maintain that. In other words, you lower your standards of what success is. But for Mobius, the extremity, they met when he was taking literature courses, and he had to create, this is more extreme, I think. He had to create an entire fictional career and then people it with stories about, the time he was accused by a student of harassment, why he got fired from a particular job, what this head of the Department of English was like at this one university. It's all fabricated. It's all fabricated. The whole thing is made up. that's an extreme version of how people fudge the truths they don't want others to know about them or their lives, don't you think? I mean, so you're right. Truth is a what is truth? Pilate said. It's you're not going to get the whole truth, but the line from Jack Nicholson, "You can't handle the truth," is one with which Mobius would agree. And Penny should not be talking to Mobius as she does to Nick when he comes back about her most difficult cases and what people do to each other and the horrific things she has to deal with. And all counselors, in my experience, find someone they could talk to in order to manage the reality of what they know as a result of their work. Everybody finds somebody. And my experience is that in the intelligence community, not everybody does that, but a lot of people do. And one of the reasons this book is so truthful underneath the fiction is because I engaged intimately and with affection and support with people all over the world who wanted to talk about what they couldn't easily handle. And it does create a burden. It is burdensome to know some of the things that I know. I'm thinking back, looking at Shirley, looking very serious there. The time I came down after a UFO interview, it was about 4 hours, and I came downstairs when we lived in a house with stairs. And you remember, you looked at me, you said, "What was that? You look like you've seen a ghost." Well, I felt like I had seen a ghost listening to a woman describe the reality she had to deal with. And like Mobius and like Penny, I get off on that. I'm an adrenaline junkie, and Mobius was certainly an adrenaline junkie, and many people in the intelligence community are. And in a hidden way, so are many counselors, because Mobius confronts Penny at one point where they're having kind of a fight, that she builds a blind, and then she sits there and waits for the deer to come through. And she gets to observe the deer. Well, he makes the statement, journalists do the same. They have the comfort of being able to see and judge and articulate what other people are doing, often wrong. But they never investigate the Washington Post. They never investigate Star Tribune. They never investigate themselves. And it's true, church counselors don't go after the church. So
Richard, I'm interested in the journalistic angle. I have a journalism degree. So your agencies in the book direct misinformation to certain journalists. Do you think that continues to go on today?
well, I can tell you that when I asked Bernstein of Woodward and Bernstein about that, because he had written an article, I think it was 1978 for Rolling Stone, in which he detailed the contracts the agencies, especially CIA, had with all of the major networks and newspapers of the time, as well as having between 200 and 300 good journalists on the payroll. So that was just the way it was done. And I asked Bernstein, I said, "What do you say about that today?" And to my astonishment, he's gone over to the other side. He's on the dark side now. He said, "Oh, well, they don't have time to do that today." Well, that's just complete nonsense. Complete nonsense. The head of the propaganda wing, the public affairs guys, CIA, said in the 90s, late 90s, he said, "One good journalist is worth 10 agents on the ground." Because if the name of the game is framing the questions that people think to ask, then how you do that is critical and the source of ultimate power, because you are creating the model of reality, of the paradigm in which people think and live and have their very being. And in a paradigm determines the questions you even think you can ask. And if you determine the questions people think they can ask, you don't have to worry about the answers, because the questions that would genuinely penalize you are never asked because they're not thought.
Richard, you're
So,
just increasing my paranoia. That's all I can tell you.
well, in the security world, we speak of appropriate paranoia, and let me give you an example. I see we're getting to the end of an hour, but let me give you a story. 2 parts. A fellow I'd known for a long time, who worked from time to time for one of the agencies, approached me at a conference in Vegas. I've spoken there every year for 24 years at this conference. Nobody else has done that. So I've known a lot of people there. And he says, let's go for a walk. He says, I want to tell you something. I want to talk to you about something. I said, okay. Not here? No, I don't want anyone to overhear it. So we walk down the strip, you know how crowded it is. And he sits on the steps at a mall. So people are streaming around us so no one can hear anything. And he brings up a particular event. And he says, are you familiar with this event? And I said, well, yeah, sure. And he said, well, what do you think happened? And I told him what I thought happened. And he said, that's not what happened. And I said, oh, what happened? And he told me an alternative story. And I said, how do you know that? And he said, because I did it. And if you even put this into fiction, like you're always talking about doing, I could be killed because they would probably know I had to be the one that told you. So you can't mention it. And I said, well, how is this affecting you? This was a big deal. And I noticed his cheek was jumping. He said, you see my tick? I stand at the window looking for vans without markings on them on my street. Paranoia was appropriate to what he had done because of the importance of it. And this is the key thing. It so contradicted what I thought had happened that I realized I knew nothing. I didn't know anything. Because if I didn't know that, how did I know the other things that I thought I knew? Well, I talked about this experience in a speech called Playing Through the Pain, the dark side of security and intelligence work. And it's on YouTube. I did it at that conference. And Dana Priest, who's a top journalist in the Washington Post, called. And I know that she called because that so triggered her own experience. She said there have been a number of times where my sources, she did a lot of work on rendition. She was a very good journalist. She said, a number of my sources, about 4 times, she said, I have been told things that fit what you described, where the cornerstone of what I thought was real was so pulled out that the whole edifice of my belief system came tumbling down. And she said, I tried to tell people, colleagues, family, not what it was. She couldn't tell the details, but tried to tell them what it was like to have that experience. She said it was like living underwater for weeks because it was so traumatic to find out what was real. Now, we knew what each other was talking about, right? And when Ellsberg, who did the Pentagon Papers, gave advice to Henry Kissinger, who was about to get elevated clearances, he said, Henry, you need to know what the impact of your clearances is going to be at the outset, because you're going to find out that you didn't know a damn thing, and that a lot of people around you did know, and they didn't tell you. Because at the level of the clearances you're about to get, you will find that the stories you read in the New York Times and the Washington Post and so on, at best they're half true, but they didn't know, and they didn't know that they didn't know. And people read the stories and believe them and form a fabric of reality. And to the degree that you inflect that reality one way or another, you have power. And what else is Trump doing by repeating that lie over and over and over again until so many people can't think of any other thing but that to be true. So what you call paranoia, I call the necessity of doing good counterintelligence work for the normal critical thinking citizen, which I would hope Phi Beta Kappa includes, just in order to know what's going on. I have an article on Islands in the Clickstream, a collection of my nonfiction called Why We Are All Getting a Little Crazy. And it's about that. It uses James Jesus Angleton, who was a top spy master for us, counterintelligence. And he was mired in scheme upon scheme upon scheme until at the end of his career, he was deceiving himself. He didn't know what was real. Because to play the game at that level, you start to suspect that things you find to be true are what the Soviets in that case planted in order to make you think they were true. And you can't accept anything at face value. Well, as we started out, good place to conclude, most people don't want to live like that. They want to have a fabric of reality that is reassuring and comforting. They want predictability. They want control. And they don't want things to assault that sense of invulnerability. And so that makes people open to be sold a story. And that's just the world we live in right now. So Mobius, in part of his life, created those stories, but he had to create them in his relationship with the one woman to whom he returned again and again as kind of a steadying influence on him. And what happens in their relationship is what happens when you build a life on those kinds of lies.
In the therapy world, we call those illusions. And they are deluding themselves by believing the illusions that they have created. And there is pathology in that.
Right. I agree with that. I'll make an appointment to see you.
All right, well, Richard,
For
thank
the sake
you.
of the story.
Very
They
interesting.
come very easily.
Yeah. Very interesting talk. Tell them where they can buy the book if they haven't already bought it and read it.
Well, there are two primary ways. You can ask me if you want it, same price as Amazon. The book is $25, $5 mailing. You can go to Amazon and download it on Kindle, which is only $15, or order it in print from Amazon, or you can order it in print signed from me for the same price. And
Just like that, you'll sign.
yeah, there it is. There it is. So just be in touch with me. You've got everybody's email. You can send them my email. People pay with PayPal, Venmo, or a check. Older people still write checks.
Did you see the number on the check I sent you?
No, I didn't. What was it?
Well, I was married for a long time, so over 35,000 checks.
That's a lot of checks.
Wow. I didn't write most of them.
Well, or you can go to my website, ThiemeWorks, ThiemeWorks.com, and there's a contact there. You can use the contact form to be in touch, or just write to our theme at ThiemeWorks.com. It's all quite out in the open.
I will get the or your email out to everyone on the list, and thank you, Richard. Look forward to our next meeting.
Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it very much. Thanks for hanging in. If anybody wants to talk more about the issues that are raised, just contact me afterward. We can do that. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you for
Pleasure.
the presentation.
Great.
Thanks. Glad to do it.